was solid. He'd started with nothing, a used pickup truck, a borrowed nail gun, and 15 years of pre-dawn mornings, and turned it into a thriving construction company worth fighting for. His wife Adrienne had been beside him for 8 of those years. He trusted her with the safe combination. He trusted her with the joint accounts. He trusted her with everything. That morning, Jerome reached into his safe to pull $4,000 for a subcontractor. The stacks were wrong. He counted once. He counted again. $100,000. Gone. He didn't wake Adrienne. He didn't make a sound. He sat at the kitchen table he'd built with his own hands, in the house he'd constructed from the foundation up, and he thought. What Jerome discovered next, on that security footage, in those financial records, in a hotel reservation under a name that wasn't his, would have destroyed a lesser man. But Jerome didn't rage. He didn't confront. He didn't beg for answers. What he did next was so quiet, so precise, and so completely devastating that the woman who stole from him, betrayed him, and planned to disappear, ended up on her knees, begging him to stop. She never saw it coming. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Jerome Grant woke before his alarm, as he had nearly every day for the past 20 years. The quiet darkness of early morning wrapped around him like a familiar coat as he eased out of bed, careful not to disturb Adrienne's sleeping form. His feet found their path across the bedroom carpet he'd installed himself 3 years ago, the texture as familiar as his own heartbeat. The house creaked softly under his steady footsteps, sounds he knew intimately because he'd placed every board, driven every nail. In the kitchen, the coffee maker hummed to life under his practiced hands. He'd bought it when they first moved in, a simple but reliable model that matched his own philosophy. Do what you're meant to do it well, do it without fuss. While the coffee brewed, Jerome stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard he'd landscaped over countless weekends. The spring grass needed cutting. He added it to his mental list for the weekend, right after checking the gutters he'd installed last fall. The framed photograph on the mantel caught his eye as he passed. 3 men, much younger versions of themselves, standing proud in front of their first completed project. Tommy Rodriguez, who'd moved to Texas 5 years ago, but still called every Christmas. Marcus Washington, who'd started his own electrical contracting business with Jerome's encouragement and advice. And himself, thinner then, with fewer gray hairs, but wearing the same steady expression he saw in the mirror every morning. The coffee finished brewing just as the first hint of dawn began softening the eastern sky. Jerome poured himself a cup, black, in the mug Adrienne had given him for their first anniversary, 8 years ago now. He took a slow sip, letting the warmth and familiar bitter taste ground him in the quiet morning routine. His study door opened silently on the hinges he'd carefully oiled last month. Everything in this house worked exactly as it should, because Jerome believed in maintenance, in attention to detail, in doing things right the first time. The room smelled of leather and wood polish, the desk he'd built himself, the bookshelves he'd installed when they first moved in. The safe sat exactly where it always had, recessed into the wall behind a painting of the Mississippi River. Jerome had chosen this spot carefully when building the house, reinforcing the wall specifically to hold the weight. He'd installed it himself, like everything else. The combination came to his fingers without thought. Forward 24, back 18, forward 36, the numbers marking the day he'd first started Grant Built LLC. The moment the door swung open, something in Jerome's chest went still. His hands, always steady on a job site, always certain with a tool or a blueprint, hovered over the stacked bills inside. The precise rows he maintained with the same care he gave to everything in his life had been disturbed. Someone had tried to recreate his careful organization, but Jerome knew his own work. These stacks were wrong. He set his coffee down on the desk, careful not to spill a drop on the wood he'd hand-finished. His phone came out of his pocket, and he documented everything exactly as he found it. The camera's flash harsh in the pre-dawn darkness. Only then did he touch the money. Counting each stack with the same methodical precision he applied to every aspect. $100,000 missing. The realization settled into his bones with the weight of concrete setting in its forms. Jerome closed the safe door, listening to the familiar click of the mechanism engaging. He returned to the kitchen, his footsteps no different than they had been minutes before, though everything had changed. Upstairs, he could hear Adrian's soft breathing through the ceiling, still deep in sleep. She wouldn't rise for hours yet. She never saw these early mornings, never witnessed the quiet discipline that had built everything they had. Jerome sat at the kitchen table, wrapping his hands around the coffee mug that had cooled while he counted. The house settled around him with familiar sounds, the tick of the heating system he'd installed, the gentle hum of the refrigerator he'd leveled perfectly, the barely perceptible creak of floorboards expanding in the growing morning warmth. He had built this house with his own hands, every nail, every board, every wire and pipe and shingle. He'd poured the foundation on a cold October morning, checking and rechecking the level until it was perfect. He'd framed the walls in December, working through bitter wind because he believed in finishing what you started. He'd hung the drywall in January, tiled the bathrooms in February, installed the kitchen cabinets in March. He stared at nothing, hands steady around his mug, and thought he had built this house with his own hands. He would decide what to do with it. Jerome's phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed his foreman's number. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, painting the study in weak morning light. "Mark? Yeah, I'm going to be late." "No, nothing serious. Handle the Belmore walkthrough without me." His voice remained steady, practiced from years of managing crisis moments on job sites. "Just document everything like we always do. I'll be there when I can." The study door clicked shut behind him, the lock engaging with familiar precision. Jerome had installed it himself, like everything else in this house, like the security system he was about to check. A network of cameras he'd placed throughout the property 18 months ago after the Mitchell's garage got hit 3 doors down. His laptop hummed to life on the desk. The security system's interface appeared with a few keystrokes, clean, organized, exactly as he'd designed it. What Adrian didn't know, what he'd never mentioned during the installation, was the small camera recessed into the study's bookshelf. He'd integrated it seamlessly into the wood grain, angled perfectly to capture the safe. A habit of thoroughness, installed without expectation of need. The footage archive opened smoothly. Jerome scrolled to 2 nights ago, the timestamp reading 1:14 a.m. The study appeared in the infrared glow of night vision, shadows and shapes rendered in ghostly green. At 1:17 a.m., the door opened. Adrienne entered wearing her robe, the silk one he'd bought her last Christmas. She moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone who knew the room by heart, never hesitating, never stumbling. No flashlight, no phone light, just practiced familiarity with a space she'd mapped in her mind. Jerome watched as she reached the safe, her fingers moving across the dial with fluid certainty. The combination he'd given her 3 years ago when he updated his will, a gesture of trust, ensuring she could access emergency funds if anything ever happened to him. The safe door opened without resistance. Her movements remained unhurried as she removed the cash, stack by stack, placing each bundle into the canvas tote bag hanging from her shoulder. Jerome recognized it immediately, the farmer's market bag she carried every Saturday morning when she went for fresh flowers to brighten their kitchen table. The same table where he'd sat drinking coffee less than an hour ago. The footage showed no hesitation, no trembling hands, no furtive glances toward the door. She worked with the same methodical efficiency he applied to his own tasks, though her purpose was entirely different. When the bag was full, she closed the safe, spinning the dial with practiced care. She smoothed her robe, adjusted the bag's strap on her shoulder, and walked out without a backward glance. Jerome watched it again, then a third time. His hands moved automatically, copying the footage to a private cloud account Adrienne knew nothing about. Security was always about layers, about backup plans, about ensuring nothing critical had a single point of failure. He'd learned that building houses. It applied here, too. He picked up his phone again, composing a text to Wade Fuller. "Hey, heading in late. Cover the Belmore site meeting." Simple, casual. Nothing to suggest the ground had shifted beneath everyone's feet. The kitchen still smelled of coffee when he went back downstairs. He prepared a fresh pot, filled Adrienne's favorite mug, the oversized ceramic one with purple flowers that he'd gotten her for no special reason last spring. He carried it upstairs, each step measured and deliberate. "Morning," he said softly, setting the mug on her nightstand. She stirred, blinking in the morning light that filtered through curtains he'd hung himself. He watched her face as she surfaced from sleep, studied the smile that curved her lips when she saw him, noted the easy grace with which she sat up and reached for the coffee. "You're still home?" she asked, voice warm with sleep. "No early meetings?" "Not yet," he replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Want some eggs?" Yes, please." He watched her move around the kitchen 20 minutes later, bare feet silent on the tile floor he'd laid by hand. She wore different silk pajamas now, but he could still see her in that robe, moving through the dark study with such certainty. "Adrienne." His voice remained calm, quiet. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to look me in the eye when you answer." She turned from the stove, spatula in hand, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "What is it? Did you take anything from the study safe?" "What? No, of course not." The denial came smooth and immediate, her expression shifting to gentle concern. "Why would you ask that?" He nodded slowly. "Okay." Something in her shoulders eased, so subtle most people would miss it. But Jerome had spent 20 years reading buildings for signs of stress, for hidden weaknesses that could compromise a structure. He saw the relief in that small exhale. He finished his coffee, thanked her for the eggs, and walked out to his truck. The engine turned over with the same reliable rumble it had given him for the past 5 years. His phone sat in his hand, contacts open, cursor blinking. He typed a single name, Darnell. Darnell's porch light cast long shadows across Jerome's face as he stood at the front door that evening. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of peaceful suburban street Jerome might have built houses on, though this one predated his company by decades. When Sandra Pope opened the door, her warm greeting died on her lips at the sight of Jerome's expression. She didn't ask questions. Sandra had known Jerome almost as long as Darnell had, and she read the weight in his shoulders with the practiced eye of a woman who understood when men needed space to speak hard truths. "I'll get the kids settled upstairs," she said softly, stepping aside to let Jerome in. "Give me 5 minutes." Jerome nodded, grateful for her intuition. He could hear the children's voices from the family room, homework questions, television sounds, the normal rhythm of a household at peace with itself. Sandra's voice joined them, gentle but firm, shepherding them toward bedtime with quiet authority. Darnell emerged from the kitchen, 2 bottles of water in his hands. "You eaten?" he asked, though the answer was clear in Jerome's face. Darnell had known him since they were 17. He could read Jerome's habits like a blueprint. "Not hungry?" Jerome started to say, but Sandra reappeared with 2 takeout containers from the Thai place down the street before he could finish. She set them on the kitchen table with paper napkins and plastic forks, then touched Jerome's shoulder briefly as she passed. "I'll be upstairs if you need anything," she said, and closed the kitchen door behind her with a soft click. Jerome sat heavily in the familiar kitchen chair. How many Sunday dinners had he shared at this table? How many times had he watched Sandra and Adrienne laughed together while he and Darnell grilled in the backyard? The memory felt like pressure in his chest. "Start at the beginning," Darnell said quietly, pushing one of the containers toward him. Jerome did. The safe, the missing money, the footage, the smooth denial over morning coffee. His voice remained steady, the same tone he used walking investors through project timelines, facts without emotion, numbers without interpretation. When he finished, the kitchen was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Darnell hadn't interrupted once. He'd barely moved, sitting with the still attention of someone absorbing every detail for future reference. Now he leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "How long you think this has been going on?" Jerome shook his head. "Don't know yet, but she's too comfortable with it. Too smooth. This isn't the first time." "Then don't move until you know the whole thing," Darnell said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared history in East St. Louis. "A man who moves too fast loses the advantage of knowing more than they do." Jerome nodded, understanding immediately. The wisdom wasn't from a book or a seminar. It was earned knowledge from a neighborhood where showing your hand too early could cost you everything. The next morning, Jerome walked into his bank at exactly 9:30 a.m. The fraud department representative, a woman named Michelle with reading glasses on a chain, listened carefully to his explanation about unauthorized access to joint accounts. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She placed the hold efficiently, explaining it would trigger only when someone attempted access. His next call was to Donna Reeves, a family law attorney Darnell had recommended from previous experience. Her office was downtown, housed in one of the older buildings Jerome had always admired for their solid construction. She took his initial consultation immediately. "I'm not filing yet," Jerome explained, sitting in her office. "I need to understand my position first. What I'm entitled to, what my exposure is." Donna nodded approvingly. "Smart. Better to build the foundation before you pour the concrete." Her understanding of construction metaphors told Jerome why Darnell had recommended her. That evening, Jerome watched Adrienne prepare dinner. Chicken stir-fry, one of his favorites. The routine felt surreal, the careful chopping, the sizzle of oil, the domestic peace of it all. His phone buzzed once, a fraud alert from the bank. Adrienne had tried to make an online purchase. Declined. She said nothing over dinner. Her chopsticks moved precisely, her conversation normal, asking about his day with practiced interest. But later, when she thought he was watching television downstairs, he heard her footsteps above, pacing the bedroom carpet he'd installed himself. Her voice carried through the ceiling, urgent and low, though the words themselves were indistinct. Jerome sat in his dark study, listening to those footsteps. His phone glowed softly as he typed a message to Patrice Hollis. "Pull every vendor payment and wire transfer from the last 18 months. Everything. Not a word to Wade." The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, pulsing in the darkness. Then, "Jerome, I've been waiting for you to ask." The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Patrice's apartment complex as Jerome parked his truck. It was barely 7 a.m., early enough that most residents were still getting ready for work. He'd chosen this time deliberately. No one from Grant Built would see his vehicle here. Patrice opened her door before he could knock, already dressed for the office in her usual crisp blouse and dark slacks. Her apartment was small, but meticulously organized, like her desk at work. A single coffee cup sat on her kitchen counter. "I didn't print anything," she said quietly, leading him to her dining table where her laptop waited. "I thought it would be safer to keep everything digital for now." Jerome nodded, appreciating her caution. She sat down and opened her computer, typing in her password with practiced efficiency. Her hands were steady, but Jerome noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. "Start at the beginning," he said, using the same words Darnell had used with him. Patrice pulled up a spreadsheet, each row highlighted in different colors. "Consolidated Site Services," she said, pointing to a recurring name in the vendor column. "First payment showed up 22 months ago. Small at first, $8,000 here, $1,400 there? Then bigger amounts started appearing. She scrolled through the entries. Jerome leaned closer, reading the dates and amounts. His construction experience had taught him to spot patterns in seemingly random data. The timing is irregular, Patrice continued, but the total across all transactions is $187,000. I've triple-checked every entry. Tell me about the company. Patrice shook her head. That's just it. There isn't one. Not really. No physical address beyond a P.O. box. No website beyond a basic registration page. No employees I could verify. It's a shell, Jerome. A well-constructed one, but still just a shell. She pulled up another document, a scan of an invoice. I first noticed something wrong 14 months ago. Remember Thompson Electrical? They called about a late payment. When I checked, their invoice number had been duplicated on a consolidated site services bill. Same format, different amount. Jerome watched her face as she spoke. You brought it up to Wade? Casually. Like I was just double-checking something routine. Patrice's fingers tightened slightly on her mouse. He explained it away smoothly, said it was a coding error in our new billing system. But after that, she paused, choosing her words carefully. He changed toward me, started checking in more often, complimenting my work, bringing coffee to my desk. It felt wrong, Jerome finished, like he was watching you. Exactly. She met his eyes. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't prove it. And I needed this job, Jerome. I have student loans, rent. She gestured at her apartment. I couldn't risk being wrong. Jerome nodded, understanding completely. You did the right thing, staying quiet until you were sure. He paused, then asked the question that had been forming since she mentioned Wade. Patrice, in your opinion, do Wade and Adrian know each other beyond company functions? The slight shift in Patrice's expression told him everything before she even moved her mouse. She clicked to another folder, opened an image file. Company Instagram post from the Children's Hospital Gala last year, she said softly. The one you missed because of the Franklin site emergency. It was deleted a few hours after posting, but she tapped her screen. I save everything. Jerome stared at the photo. The charity gala's elegant backdrop framed the scene perfectly. Wade and Adrian at a corner table, caught in what looked like intimate conversation. Wade's hand rested casually on the small of Adrian's back, the gesture familiar and possessive. Adrian's hand lay on Wade's forearm, her fingers curled comfortably against his sleeve. She wore the blue dress, the one Jerome had chosen for their 6th anniversary, because she'd said it was her favorite color. The one she'd hugged him for, saying he knew her taste so well. I kept this, Patrice said quietly, because something about it felt important. The way they were touching. It wasn't new. They weren't being careful. They didn't think anyone was watching. Jerome stood slowly, his contractor's mind automatically calculating load-bearing weights. $100,000 from the safe. $187,000 from the company. $287,000 total. Almost a full year's profit from Grant Built, lifted quietly from the life he'd constructed brick by brick. Thank you, Patrice, he said, his voice steady. Send everything to my private email. And don't worry about your job. Whatever happens next, you're protected. Back in his truck, Jerome sat with his hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. He pulled up the gala photo on his phone again. The blue dress caught the light perfectly. He remembered the store where he'd bought it, remembered Adrian's smile when she'd opened the box. Jerome pulled into his driveway that evening just before 6, exactly on schedule. The normalcy had to be perfect. He'd spent the drive home settling his face into what he thought of as his site review expression, alert but unbothered, focused but not tense, the kind of face that wouldn't trigger questions. Inside, Adrian was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. The domestic scene struck him with its practiced familiarity, the sound of the knife on the cutting board, the steam rising from a pot on the stove, her hair pulled back in the loose way she preferred for cooking. "Long day?" she asked, not looking up from her chopping. "Routine stuff," Jerome said, moving to the coffee maker. "Want a cup?" "Please." She smiled at him, the same smile he'd seen in the gala photo hours earlier. "You always know when I need one." He measured the beans precisely, the way he always did. The routine movements helped steady his hands. While the coffee brewed, he asked about her day, listened to her description of a challenging spin class, nodded at all the right moments. When he handed her the mug, he let his fingers brush hers slightly. The kind of casual intimacy expected after 15 years of marriage. Over the next 10 days, Jerome maintained this performance with contractor's precision. Each morning, coffee. Each evening, attention to her stories. He complimented the new throw pillows on the couch, noticed when she changed her nail color, asked about the book on her nightstand. He became the most attentive version of himself, the version she'd never complained about missing, until he heard her on the phone that night, voice low and urgent after the cards were declined. But while he performed normalcy, he observed. The first discovery came 3 days in. A slim, dark phone, different from her usual iPhone, glimpsed briefly in the outer pocket of her gym bag when she set it down to get water. She snatched it up quickly, casually, like someone managing something they didn't want noticed. Jerome kept his eyes on his coffee cup, mind calculating. Prepaid phone, probably. Untraceable. Smart. The second pattern emerged over several days. Calls she took in the backyard, always standing by the far fence where the neighbors' cedar trees provided coverage. Jerome watched through the kitchen window while loading the dishwasher, noting how she turned slightly away from the house, one hand gesturing in contained movements, voice pitched too low to carry. The body language of someone being careful. The third piece arrived on day 7. Their shared household tablet sat on the coffee table, screen dark but unlocked. Jerome picked it up to check the weather and found an open browser tab. Real estate listings in Atlanta's Midtown neighborhood, filtered by price range, $2,800 to $3,500 monthly. Sorted by immediate availability. He took screenshots without closing anything, leaving the digital trail exactly as he found it. She was planning something with a timeline. That evening, Jerome called Darnell from his truck after a site inspection. "I need someone careful," he said, not bothering with hello. "Someone who knows how to watch without being seen." "Gary Odom," Darnell replied immediately. Former St. Louis PD detective, handled financial crimes and domestic cases for 15 years before going private. "Two people I trust completely have used him. He's thorough, and he's quiet." Jerome met Gary the next afternoon in a coffee shop near the Franklin site. Neutral ground, public, but not conspicuous. Gary was in his early 60s, silver-haired, dressed in the kind of unremarkable business casual that wouldn't draw a second glance anywhere in the city. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive. "Mr. Grant," he said simply, sitting down with his coffee. "Tell me what you need." Jerome laid out the basics with blueprint precision. Adrienne's physical description, height, hair color, the cars she drove, her white Lexus SUV, and occasionally his spare truck. Her regular schedule, spin class Tuesday and Thursday mornings, standing lunch with friends on Wednesdays, grocery shopping Sunday afternoons. The prepaid phone, slim, dark-colored, probably bought within the last month. Then Wade Fuller's information, his black Mercedes sedan, his usual routes between home and office, his regular Thursday client meetings. 2-week window, Jerome said, sliding an envelope across the table. "I need to know where they go, who they meet, what patterns emerge. Everything documented." Gary nodded, tucking the envelope away without counting it. "I'll need a recent photo of both subjects." Jerome pulled up the company website on his phone. Wade's partner bio photo, Adrienne from last month's charity dinner. Gary studied them briefly, noting details only someone with decades of surveillance experience would catch. "First report in 5 days," Gary said, standing. I'll call the number you provided." Jerome drove back to the Franklin site, hands steady on the wheel. The foundation pour was scheduled for tomorrow morning. He needed to check the forms one more time before sunset. Jerome sat at his desk, staring at the plain manila envelope Gary had delivered earlier. He'd kept it unopened through 3 contractor meetings, a site inspection, and a full afternoon of paperwork. Now, with the office empty and the sun setting through his window, he picked up his letter opener, the one Adrian had given him for their 10th anniversary, engraved with his initials. The irony wasn't lost on him. Inside were 8x10 photographs, crisp and professional. The first showed the exterior of Tosca's, an upscale Italian place in Midtown, where Adrian met her friends for their standing Wednesday lunch. Except today's lunch wasn't with friends. The second photo caught them through the restaurant's front window. Adrian and Wade at a corner table, angled just enough that someone passing wouldn't immediately notice them. Her hair was pulled back the way she wore it for special occasions. She was wearing the blue dress she'd bought last month, the one she said was for a charity committee meeting. The third photo made Jerome's hands go still. They were holding hands across the table. Not a quick touch, not a casual gesture, but the kind of sustained contact that spoke of comfort and habit. Wade's thumb traced small circles on her palm. Adrienne was smiling at him the way she used to smile at Jerome in the early years, before whatever this was started growing in the spaces between them. The fourth photo landed like a physical blow. Wade was leaning across the table, kissing her. It wasn't quick or furtive. It was the unhurried kiss of people who weren't worried about being seen. Adrienne's hand rested against the side of his face, tender and familiar. The intimacy of it made Jerome's chest tighten. He sat perfectly still for 20 minutes, hands flat on his desk, breathing steadily the way he did when inspecting dangerous structural issues. Then he pulled out a fresh manila folder, wrote "Surveillance Documentation, Phase 1" in his precise contractor's handwriting, and locked the photos in his desk drawer. He went back to work, reviewing bids for the Franklin Avenue project until sunset. Over the next week, Gary's expanded surveillance painted an increasingly detailed picture. Wade Fuller's travel records showed 4 trips to Atlanta in the past year, all booked on his business credit card. The hotel was consistent. The Highland, a boutique property in Midtown with rates that would raise eyebrows on a standard expense report. Gary's team confirmed Adrienne's white Lexus in long-term parking at Lambert Airport on the dates of 2 trips, arrival and departure times matching Wade's itinerary perfectly. They'd traveled together, not even bothering to book separate flights. Then came the hotel detail that closed the circle. Through a source at the Highland, Gary obtained a copy of Wade's most recent reservation. It wasn't booked under Wade Fuller and Guest, or separate rooms maintained for appearance. The reservation read simply, "Mr. and Mrs. Fuller." They weren't just having an affair. They were rehearsing a new life. The final report came on a Friday afternoon. Jerome was at the Belmore site checking the progress on the second-floor framing when Darnell's truck pulled up. His friend's expression told him everything before a word was spoken. They sat in Jerome's truck, the air conditioning running against the late summer heat. Darnell opened the folder himself first, read it completely, then handed it across without comment. Jerome read every word, his face giving away nothing. The hotel reservation was there in black and white. Mr. and Mrs. Fuller, typed out like it was already real, like the life Jerome had built was just an inconvenient transition phase on the way to something else. He closed the folder. Through the windshield, he could see his crew working on the building's skeleton, each beam and joist going exactly where the plans said they should. Everything plumb and level because he'd checked it himself that morning. The reliability of proper construction felt like the only solid thing left in his world. "Tell me what you need me to do," Darnell said quietly, the offer carrying the weight of 25 years of friendship behind it. Jerome told him. Jerome sat in Donna Reeves's office at exactly 8:30 a.m., while Adrienne was at her regular Monday spin class. The morning light filtered through the vertical blinds, casting thin stripes across the polished surface of Donna's desk. Everything about the office spoke of precision, from the perfectly aligned legal volumes on the shelves to the way Donna herself sat, straight-backed and focused, as she laid out the divorce filing. "I've reviewed everything you provided," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of 30 years' experience. The surveillance footage, the forensic accounting from Patrice, the PI documentation, and the Atlanta apartment inquiry. "This is one of the most thoroughly prepared initial filings I've seen in my career." Jerome nodded, his hands resting calmly on the armrests of his chair. "I believe in proper preparation." "Clearly." Donna spread the documents in front of him, each tab marked with yellow flags for signature. The filing cites financial fraud, dissipation of marital assets, and theft. The safe footage alone establishes intentional removal of marital assets. The forensic documentation shows a pattern of coordinated financial misconduct between your wife and your business partner. Jerome read each page carefully before signing, the same way he reviewed every contract that crossed his desk at Grant Built. His signature was steady and precise. No hesitation, no flourish. Just the clean execution of something that needed doing. "My business attorney?" he asked. "Already coordinating with me on the civil suit against Wade Fuller," Donna confirmed. "The forensic accounting firm starts their full audit of Grant Built LLC this afternoon. Once that process begins, Mr. Fuller cannot legally interfere with or slow it down." Jerome signed the final page. "And the timing?" "The filings will hit simultaneously, the divorce action and the civil suit. Mr. Fuller's attorney will receive notice of both the suit and the audit within the hour. Your wife's attorney will receive the divorce filing by 11 a.m. Donna gathered the signed documents with efficient movements. "Are you prepared for her reaction?" "Yes." Jerome stood, straightening his work shirt. He had a site to visit. By 10 a.m., he was sitting in his office with Mike Torres, his foreman of 8 years, and David Chen, his site supervisor of 5. Both men held small equity stakes in Grant Built, rewards for years of loyal service and quality work. They sat across from him, their faces showing the concern of men who could sense something serious was happening. "There's a legal situation developing with the partnership," Jerome said directly. "Wade Fuller is being removed for misconduct. I wanted you both to hear it from me first." Mike shifted in his chair. "How bad?" "Bad enough. But the company is protected. Your positions are secure, and your equity agreements are safe." Jerome met both men's eyes in turn. "I give you my word on that." Neither man asked for details. They'd worked with Jerome long enough to know his word meant something. David nodded once, decisive. Mike simply said, "Whatever you need, boss." At 11:47 a.m., Jerome was walking the Monroe Street project, checking the foundation work, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Adrienne's name lit up the screen. She must have heard from her attorney by now. He looked at the display for a long moment, remembering the surveillance photos, remembering Mr. and Mrs. Fuller typed on that hotel reservation. He slipped the phone back in his pocket and kept walking. The concrete needed his attention more than her call did. The foundation looked good, level and true, no signs of settling or stress. He ran his hand along the surface, feeling for irregularities the way his first foreman had taught him 20 years ago. Everything solid, everything where it should be. His phone buzzed 3 more times while he completed the inspection. He didn't check it again. By 2 p.m., he'd finished the site walk and was sitting in his truck in the parking lot. The day was hot, the kind of late summer heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. He pulled out his phone and dialed Darnell. "It's done," he said when his friend answered. "Set up the meeting for Thursday." "I'll handle it," Darnell replied, no other words needed between them. Jerome ended the call and sat watching his crew work through the windshield. They moved with purpose and precision across the site. each person knowing their role, everything building toward something solid and true. He started the engine. There was more work to do. Jerome stood at his kitchen counter at 6:45 p.m. on Thursday evening, making a fresh pot of coffee. His movements were unhurried, precise, measuring the grounds, filling the water reservoir, pressing the brew button. The familiar ritual steadied his hands. He knew what was coming. The living room had been arranged with careful intention. The dining table, where Jerome had eaten countless meals with Adrienne over 8 years of marriage, now felt more like a courtroom bench. Donna Reeves sat with her leather portfolio placed precisely in front of her, every document inside organized and flagged. Jerome's mother, Catherine, sat beside her, straight-backed and silent, her face carrying the particular dignity of a woman who had raised her son to face hard things without flinching. Bernard and Gloria Ballard arrived exactly at 7, as requested. Gloria hugged Jerome tightly when he opened the door, the way she always had, though something in her embrace suggested she already sensed something was deeply wrong. Bernard shook Jerome's hand firmly, his weathered face showing concern but trust. They had known Jerome for nearly a decade, had watched him build his company from nothing, had seen how he treated their daughter. They took their seats at the table without questions. Darnell positioned himself against the far wall, arms folded, a quiet presence exactly where Jerome had asked him to be. His stillness added weight to the room, the kind of weight that comes from 25 years of friendship and absolute loyalty. Jerome heard Adrienne's car pull into the driveway at 7:15, the sound of her key in the lock, the click of her heels on the hardwood. Then silence as she stepped into the living room and registered what she was seeing. The change in her face happened in micro-expressions: confusion, recognition, fear, calculation. Her composure cracked visibly for just a moment before her social training kicked in. She laughed lightly, the sound falling flat in the heavy air. "What's going on?" She moved toward Jerome, reaching for his arm with the easy familiarity of a wife who had done it countless times before. "Why is everyone?" Jerome stepped smoothly aside, letting her hand fall through empty air. The movement was gentle, but decisive. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. "Sit down, Adrienne," he said quietly. She remained standing for a long moment, looking around the room, at her parents, at Jerome's mother, at Donna Reeves's professional presence, at Darnell's steady gaze from the wall. Finally, she lowered herself into a chair, her movements careful, as if the floor might shift beneath her. Jerome opened his laptop without preamble. The security footage played in perfect clarity. Adrienne crossing the dark study at 1:17 a.m., opening the safe with practiced ease, filling the canvas tote bag with banded cash. The room watched in complete silence. Gloria's hand moved to her mouth. Bernard's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. When the footage ended, Jerome closed the laptop gently. He slid the surveillance photographs across the table's polished surface. The restaurant, the intimate lunch, Wade Fuller leaning across the table to kiss Adrienne, while her hand rested against his face. Bernard picked up one photo, looked at it for a long moment, then set it down and stared at the ceiling. Gloria couldn't bring herself to touch them at all. Donna Reeves moved next, sliding the forensic accounting summary forward. 11 precise pages detailing every fraudulent transaction, every shell vendor payment, the full $287,000 extracted from Grant Built LLC through careful coordination between Adrienne and Wade. The numbers spoke for themselves. Jerome let them. Adrienne's breathing had become shallow, but her training in social performance kicked in hard. She straightened in her chair, her voice taking on an edge of righteous injury. "Jerome is controlling," she said, the words coming fast and practiced. "He monitors everything I do. He installed cameras without telling me. He tracks my spending. The money was for—" Jerome let her finish. He didn't interrupt, didn't react. He waited until her voice ran down, until the silence settled back over the room. Then he nodded once at Donna, who slid the final document across the table. The hotel reservation from Atlanta, crisp and clear. Mr. and Mrs. Fuller. Gloria Ballard stood abruptly and walked to the far corner of the room, one hand pressed hard against her mouth. Bernard stared at his daughter with an expression that contained decades of dismantled pride. Adrienne looked at Jerome, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. The full weight of what had been built against her settled into her face. The divorce filing already submitted, the accounts frozen, the affair documented, the exit plan exposed, and her parents sitting here witnessing all of it. Her careful calculations crumbled visibly. "Jerome," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, please don't do this. I am begging you." The consequences arrived like dominoes falling in precise sequence, each impact triggering the next, each collapse more complete than the last. The divorce filing moved through the courts with mechanical efficiency, Jerome's evidence forming an unshakable foundation. Donna Reeves argued intentional dissipation of marital assets with devastating precision, presenting the safe footage alongside the forensic accounting trail. The judge watched Adrienne navigate the dark study at 1:17 a.m., filling that canvas tote bag with banded cash, her movements calm and practiced. When Adrienne's attorney attempted to argue that she had legitimate concerns about financial control, Donna simply presented the Atlanta hotel reservation, Mr. and Mrs. Fuller, and let the contradiction stand. The settlement negotiations collapsed under the weight of documented theft. The accounts Jerome had frozen weeks earlier remained untouched, protecting his liquidity completely. Adrienne's attorney, facing overwhelming evidence of premeditated financial misconduct, could only secure a fraction of what she would have received in a normal dissolution. The $100,000 from the safe became a millstone around her neck. The judge cited it specifically in the final order. The Atlanta apartment slipped away like smoke. The deposit and first month's payment, drawn from Adrienne's personal savings, vanished into forfeiture when the lease fell through. The life she had imagined there, the fresh start she had planned so carefully, dissolved before it could begin. She moved back to her childhood bedroom in her parents' house, the same suburban St. Louis neighborhood she had once been so desperate to escape, now a cage built of her own choices. Wade Fuller's collapse was even more complete. His decision to countersue Jerome, claiming bad faith in the audit and verbal authorization for the shell vendor payments, proved catastrophically miscalculated. The aggressive move triggered exactly what Wade hadn't accounted for: a deeper forensic review that expanded beyond the initial 18-month window. The numbers that emerged destroyed him utterly. 2 additional years of careful skimming surfaced like bodies rising in still water. Padded materials, invoices, double billing on municipal contracts, a pattern of theft so consistent it could only have been intentional. The total figure climbed from $187,000 to $310,000 over 4 years. The prosecutor's office, reviewing the expanded evidence, elevated the charges accordingly: felony theft, wire fraud, and financial exploitation of a business partner. Wade's attorney, who had pushed so confidently for the countersue, pivoted immediately to damage control. The plea negotiations moved with brutal efficiency. 18 months in minimum security federal custody, 3 years of supervised probation upon release, and a restitution order for the full $310,000 that would attach to every future asset and garnish every future paycheck until the debt was cleared. Before Wade could even report to begin his sentence, his personal life imploded in sequence. Sandra Fuller, his wife of 11 years, filed for divorce the week the plea became public. She retained her own forensic accountant, determined to protect herself from any hidden liability. She kept the house. It had always been in her name, a tax arrangement Wade himself had suggested years ago, never imagining it would work against him. He moved into a sparse rental unit across town, watching his life compress into boxes. His professional extinction was equally thorough. The Missouri State Contractors Board revoked his licenses permanently based on the felony convictions. His professional bonding, essential for any serious contracting work, was canceled and marked as permanently ineligible for renewal. The same pattern repeated in both neighboring states, where he held credentials. The industry contacts he had cultivated for 2 decades stopped returning his calls. In St. Louis's close-knit contracting community, where reputation was currency and Jerome Grant's name carried weight, Wade Fuller became toxic. A cautionary tale, a word people used to mean untrustworthy. Through all of it, Jerome said nothing publicly about either of them. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself, in court documents, in industry circles, in the quiet conversations at charity galas, and groundbreaking ceremonies where Wade's name used to be spoken with respect. Jerome simply continued being exactly who he had always been. Present at his job sites, fair to his employees, reliable to everyone who counted on him. On a cool Tuesday morning in early fall, Wade Fuller reported to the federal facility where he would spend the next 18 months. The local business journal ran a small item about it. 3 paragraphs, no photo, tucked between larger stories about development projects and zoning changes. Jerome was on a job site across town, watching his crew pour a foundation that would support a structure long after Wade's sentence ended. He did not read the news that day. He had concrete to level. 18 months carved new lines into St. Louis's landscape. Old structures came down, new ones rose up, and Grant Built LLC grew like a well-tended garden, slow, steady, and strong from the roots. The company books, cleared of Wade's parasitic drain, showed the kind of clean profit margins that made bank officers smile during quarterly reviews. Jerome used that strength deliberately, the way he used every tool, not to expand too fast, but to build something that would last. He moved the office into a renovated brick building in Lafayette Square, with high ceilings and windows that let in natural light. Patrice's new office, with operations manager on the door in simple black letters, had a view of the park. She ran the office the way she had always worked, with quiet precision and absolute clarity. The equity stake Jerome offered her wasn't charity or compensation. It was recognition of what she had always been. A builder in her own right, someone who understood that numbers on paper were just another kind of foundation. Her signature now appeared on company documents next to his. She hired 2 assistants and trained them with the same attention to detail she brought to everything. Jerome found Andre Williams through a job training program in East St. Louis, a young man with careful hands and serious eyes who showed up 15 minutes early to every shift. He watched Jerome level concrete with an attention that felt familiar. Jerome recognized it immediately, the focus of someone who had grown up watching adults cut corners and decided early that he would do things differently. The second hire, Marcus Taylor, came through Andre's recommendation. 24, with a 2-year-old daughter he was raising alone, Marcus had the same quality Jerome looked for in every employee: the willingness to learn something properly the first time. Jerome put both young men with his best crew leaders and paid for their certifications. He remembered what it felt like to be young and capable and just needing someone to open the right door. The new house rose on a quiet lot in Richmond Heights. Not a mansion, not a statement, but a home designed entirely on Jerome's terms. He spent 3 weeks at his kitchen table with graph paper and sharp pencils, drawing and redrawing until every line was exactly where he wanted it. The layout was simple but precise. Open sight lines, natural light. A study with built-in shelves and a window seat where he could read in the morning sun. He broke ground on a Saturday in early spring. His crew showed up without being asked, the way they did for family. Darnell brought coffee in a steel thermos and set up a camp chair at the edge of the lot, watching with the satisfied expression of a man seeing something he had known was coming since the day they met at 17. The foundation went in clean and true. Jerome checked every measurement himself. The Sunday cookouts at Darnell's house became a quiet constant. Crew members dropping by with their families, kids playing in the backyard, the smell of smoke and spice rising from the grill. Jerome found himself laughing more easily, sleeping without weight on his chest. One afternoon, watching Andre teach Darnell's youngest son how to hold a level properly, Jerome said quietly, "I feel like myself again." Darnell, turning ribs on the grill with practiced ease, didn't look up. "You always were. She just had you convinced otherwise." Gwen Ballard still called sometimes. She had maintained a careful friendship with Jerome, carrying what felt like guilt for her sister's choices. She mentioned, during one conversation, that Adrienne had been talking about him differently lately, not with anger or blame, but with the halting uncertainty of someone trying to explain a decision they had stopped being able to justify even to themselves. Jerome listened without comment. He wished her neither harm nor restoration. She existed in a category of things he no longer spent energy considering. Wade Fuller's life compressed into night shifts at a crosstown warehouse, moving boxes under fluorescent lights for $12 an hour. The $310,000 restitution order hung over him like a perpetual cloud, garnishing his wages before they hit his account. He had stopped trying to make industry contacts. In St. Louis, contracting circles, his name had become a verb. To Fuller, someone meant to betray trust for money. The East Saint. Lewis Community Center contract came in during the early summer, the largest municipal project in Grant Bilt's history. Jerome walked every inch of the site himself before submitting the bid. The center would serve the same streets he grew up on, the same blocks where he and Darnell had learned about work and worth and what it meant to build something real. On a Friday evening in late autumn, Jerome stood alone on the finished slab as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and purple. He moved across the concrete with practiced steps, reading the surface by eye, and feel the way his first foreman had taught him. His hand moved over the smooth gray plane, feeling for imperfections that weren't there. Everything was plumb. Everything was true. He walked to the temporary power panel and turned off the site lights one by one. The lot went dark except for the security lamps at the corners. His truck sat alone in the gravel parking area, waiting patiently like everything else in his life had learned to wait. Jerome got in, started the engine, and pointed the wheels toward home. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.